When I first met Madison, she smiled too much. Not in the warm, friendly way. It was the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. A precise, curated grin that always made me feel like I was already losing a game I didn't know I was playing. It was a spring afternoon, 2 weeks after I started dating Jason. He invited me to his mother's house for a casual family lunch. I spent the entire morning getting ready, obsessing over every detail of my outfit, every word I might say. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted to belong. Jason's mother, Elaine, was welcoming. Warm. A little overwhelming, but in that affectionate, chatty way. His younger brother, Tom, shook my hand and immediately asked if I liked football. I didn't, but I said yes. Then Madison arrived. She was Jason's sister, older by 2 years. Everything about her looked polished. Long honey blonde hair, flawless makeup, a perfectly tailored blouse and jeans that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She hugged Jason, kissed his cheek, and then turned to me with that too wide smile. "So," she said, eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You're the new one." It was subtle, but Jason stiffened next to me. I laughed politely. "I'm Emma. Nice to meet you." "Oh, I know. Jason's mentioned you. He said you're creative." She said the word like it meant unemployed. "I work in interior staging," I said, still smiling. "Mostly private homes." Madison nodded. "That's sweet. So, like, you move pillows around for a living?" She said it with a smile so radiant, I almost didn't realize it was a jab. Jason didn't say anything. He just rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly and changed the subject. That set the tone. Every family event after that followed the same pattern. Madison would greet me with compliments that were laced with judgment. "You look so comfortable," she'd say when I dressed casually. "Oh, that's such a bold lipstick choice," when I wore red. She once told Jason within earshot, "I just want to make sure she's with you for the right reasons. You're so generous, and some women—" That sentence never finished. Didn't need to. I brought it up to Jason once. He said she was just blunt, that it was just her way. So I tried to brush it off. Smile through it. Be the bigger person. But over time Madison made it very clear, I wasn't family. I was a visitor in her world. And she was going to remind me of that every chance she got. By the time Jason and I got engaged, I had learned how to brace myself before walking into a room where Madison would be. It was like tightening your muscles before a cold wave hit. Useless in the end, but still instinctual. I never knew what she'd say, only that she would say something. The engagement itself had been sweet and quiet. Jason proposed on a Sunday morning while we were still in pajamas, sitting on the couch with coffee. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't public. It was us. And for a little while I held on to that warmth like armor. Until we told his family. At dinner the following week, Jason announced it between bites of salad. Elaine gasped and clapped her hands. Tom stood up and clapped Jason on the back. Madison smiled. That same cold, practiced smile. "Wow," she said. "I didn't think you were the marrying type." Jason laughed nervously. "Guess I surprised you." "Oh, you did," she said, still looking at me. "But hey, people grow." After dessert I offered to help clear the table. Madison followed me into the kitchen, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. "So," she said, lifting a wine glass from the counter, "wedding planning starts now, huh?" "Not yet," I said, trying to stay pleasant. "We're just enjoying it for a while." She nodded. "Smart. You wouldn't want to get overwhelmed. It's a lot of pressure to live up to someone like Jason." I turned to her, holding a stack of plates. "What's that supposed to mean?" Madison tilted her head. "Just that he's, polished. Accomplished. People expect a certain kind of wife next to a guy like that." She smiled and walked off before I could say anything. That night I told Jason. He sighed and rubbed his eyes. "She doesn't mean it that way." "She absolutely does," I said. "She's just protective," he replied. "It's not personal." But it was personal. Every comment, every look, every calculated silence. Madison wasn't protective. She was territorial. And I had entered territory she thought belonged to her. The wedding planning made everything worse. He volunteered to help. Not because she cared, but because she wanted control. She inserted herself into every decision. Venue suggestions, dress opinions, even the guest list. At first I tried to include her. I wanted to win her over. I invited her to tastings and fittings, hoping we could start fresh. But she never wanted fresh. She wanted to stay on top. At the bridal boutique, she loudly suggested dresses that made me look washed out. "This one hides your hips nicely," she chirped. At the florist, she told the vendor I was very visual but not really design-minded. When Jason's aunt complimented my engagement ring, Madison chimed in, "It's a modest stone but tasteful." She always did it with a smile. Always with just enough innocence to escape consequence. Jason continued to downplay it. "She's just teasing," he said. "You two will be close one day." But he didn't see what I saw. This wasn't teasing. It was war, and she just started laying the traps. It all came to a head the day of my bridal shower. Jason's mother had offered to host it at her house. A big sunny colonial with white shutters and a wraparound porch. It was beautiful, warm, and full of people I barely knew but smiled at anyway. Cousins, aunts, coworkers, neighbors. Madison, of course, had arrived 30 minutes early. She was wearing a fitted white dress. "White. At my bridal shower." "Oh," she said casually, brushing imaginary lint off her sleeve when she saw my face. "Is this weird? I didn't even think about it. It's more cream, really." Everyone noticed. But no one said anything. They never did. She had a way of making you question yourself mid-reaction, like her very presence rewrote the rules in real time. I wore a blush pink sundress and tried to laugh it off. The day wasn't about her. That's what I kept telling myself. But she made sure it was. She hovered by the dessert table, correcting anyone who mispronounced anything. She made passive little jokes about our honeymoon destination, calling it basic but safe. She interrupted me while I was opening gifts to explain what she had gotten for Jason and me. A custom embroidered linen set, because I knew she wouldn't think of something like that. And then came the game. Someone had prepared a trivia game about Jason and me. How we met, favorite date spots, little facts. Madison offered to read the questions aloud. I was too drained to object. She read them with a tone just sharp enough to draw attention. Then she started ad-libbing. "Where did Jason and Emma meet?" she said, glancing around the room. "Oh, right, at that art show." Which Jason hated, by the way, but went because, well, love makes you do funny things. People laughed politely. I stared at the floor. "Next, what's Jason's favorite meal?" She paused. "I could tell you, but I'm sure Emma has it right. Even though he doesn't really eat pasta that often anymore." More laughter. She continued through the entire game like that, undercutting each answer with a smug quip or clarification. When it ended, I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I stood at the sink, palms flat on the counter, staring at my reflection. My cheeks were flushed. My throat was tight. I hated that she could still get to me. When I came back out, she was telling a story about Jason's ex-girlfriend. "I mean, she was so sweet," Madison said. "Very down to earth. She and Jason stayed friends, right?" "Oh, Emma. Have you met her?" The room fell awkwardly quiet. I smiled tightly. "No," I said. "But I've heard so much about her." There was a flicker in her eyes. The first time maybe she saw a mirror being held up to her own face. But she recovered. He always did. That night, Jason asked how the shower went. I said it was fine. He looked at me for a moment like he wanted to press but didn't. He turned back to the TV. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how many tiny wounds she had left on me over the years. All of them so small, so subtle, they didn't even bleed until I started counting them. And I realized something. Madison wasn't going to stop. Not because she hated me. Because humiliating me made her feel powerful. And I had spent years giving her that power freely. That was the last time I would. After the bridal shower, something shifted in me. For years, I had tolerated Madison's behavior under the false belief that keeping the peace was the same as having peace. But now all I felt was exhaustion. Her jabs were no longer clever. They were corrosive. And worst of all, I had let them go unchecked. I stopped trying to win her over. That was the first step. I stopped inviting her input on wedding planning. I stopped asking her opinion on anything. When she made one of her usual remarks, I gave her no reaction. I simply blinked, turned away, or smiled politely like I hadn't even heard her. Madison noticed. He tried to bait me at first. When she called me to ask about the final guest list, I told her it was already finalized. "You didn't want my help?" she asked, her voice high and innocent. "No," I said. "Not this time." Silence. Then a quick goodbye. At the rehearsal dinner, she arrived late and took credit for helping with the table design, even though she had done nothing. I didn't correct her. I just looked at her and said, "If that helps you feel included." She blinked. Just once. Like I had slapped her without raising a hand. Jason noticed the change too. He started to see more. The way Madison needled. The way I quietly deflected. "She's been like that forever," he said one night after a tense dinner. "I guess I just stopped noticing." "That's the problem," I said softly. He nodded but didn't respond. In private, I began paying attention to Madison in a new way, not as a victim of her games but as an observer. I watched how she spoke to others, how she maneuvered in conversations, how she kept control by staying just under the line of open cruelty. But she wasn't untouchable. She had a weakness, and it was screamingly obvious once I stopped trying to please her. She needed to be admired. Everything Madison did was for image. The carefully crafted social media posts, the subtle one-upmanship, the curated stories about her professional success. She was addicted to being perceived as smarter, richer, and more powerful than she actually was. And that addiction made her vulnerable. So I started to collect details. I remembered her saying she was working with a startup in fashion PR. I checked the website. No mention of her. I searched business records. Nothing. I asked a mutual acquaintance at a networking event about her firm. She rolled her eyes and said, "Madison? She hasn't worked there in over a year. She just borrows office space sometimes for photos." Photos. So that's what she was doing, staging a life. It all began to fall into place. The career stories that didn't match. The hours that didn't add up. The endless name-dropping that no one ever verified. The final piece came through a woman named Nadia, someone I knew from a former client job. She recognized Madison from an online mentorship program and told me she was in the running for a prestigious sponsorship. "She says she's running a campaign for a major label," Nadia said. "But honestly, no one can find any actual project attached to her." And just like that, the idea formed. I didn't want revenge. I wanted a reckoning. And for someone like Madison, that meant one thing. Expose the illusion. Not publicly. Not loudly. Just precisely. So I started gathering proof. Quietly. Methodically. Screenshots. Claims. Discrepancies. Photos that didn't align with reality. Because if Madison was going to humiliate me for years in private, it was only fair that she learn what it felt like to be revealed. I didn't act right away. That wasn't the plan. If I'd learned anything from Madison over the years, it was that subtlety always hits harder than spectacle. So I waited. Quietly. Carefully. By then I had a full folder on her, digital and printed. Screenshots of her claiming to work on campaigns that didn't exist, emails from contacts who confirmed she hadn't been employed in nearly a year, social posts that conflicted with what she was telling people in person. There were even photos she had staged in borrowed office spaces, pretending they were her own. All harmless on their own. But together they painted a picture. A woman building her image on borrowed things, false stories, and lies she believed too deeply to keep track of. And I had the perfect opportunity. Madison was trying to land a spot in a women's leadership program that focused on mentorship, business ethics, and female entrepreneurship. It was competitive and very public. She had been dropping it into every conversation for weeks. "I'm a finalist," she told people. "It's between me and one other woman. They're just doing a background review now." That was the window. I wasn't going to embarrass her publicly. I wasn't going to gossip or post anything online. That would have made me just like her. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. So I compiled everything into a clean, fact-based document. No insults. No speculation. Just a timeline of statements versus facts. Quotes from public sources. Screenshots. References. Then I created a separate, anonymous email. And I sent it to the Leadership Programs Review Committee with no explanation. Just the file and a subject line. "For your due diligence." I never expected a response. I never needed one. Because a week later, Madison's name disappeared from the finalist list. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. A few days after that, she posted a photo of herself at a cafe with the caption, "Learning to embrace the unexpected and step away from things that don't serve me anymore." Classic Madison. But something was different. At the next family dinner, she didn't wear something dramatic. She didn't dominate the conversation. She didn't throw a single dig my way. She kept looking down at her phone, distracted, withdrawn. She barely made eye contact with anyone. Jason noticed. She okay? He asked as we got in the car. I think she's just tired, I said. But I knew the truth. She was shaken. Her mask had slipped, maybe just a little, but enough that she finally knew what it felt like to live in uncertainty. To not be admired. To be watched instead of worshipped. And the best part? I never raised my voice. I never told a soul. Because sometimes the best way to silence someone who lives to humiliate you is to let them watch their own empire crack from the inside. After that dinner, everything changed. Slowly, subtly, but undeniably. Madison was still there at every family gathering, every birthday, every holiday, but something in her had dulled. The fire she used to bring into every room, the smug little digs, the exaggerated laughs, the constant need to command attention, was gone. She wasn't silent. She just wasn't dangerous anymore. She no longer corrected me in front of others. She didn't compete for Jason's attention like she used to. When I walked into a room, she looked up, but didn't try to overshadow me. It was as if she wasn't sure who she was anymore now that her favorite role, bully in disguise, no longer had a place to perform. And I didn't gloat. I didn't raise an eyebrow when she offered to help clean the dishes at Thanksgiving. I didn't react when she complimented my dress at Elaine's birthday dinner. I just nodded and said, thanks, like it meant nothing. That's what really unnerved her. Because Madison wasn't used to being ignored. She thrived on tension, on emotional pushback. That's what made her feel powerful. But now there was nothing for her to push against. One night, about 2 weeks after the leadership program had removed her name, she stayed behind after a family dinner. Everyone else had gone home. I was in the kitchen with the last of the dishes when I turned around and found her standing in the doorway. She didn't say anything at first. She just leaned on the frame, arms crossed, watching me quietly. I'm not sure what happened, she said finally. Her voice was flat. But I know you're not as soft as you pretend to be. I dried my hands on a towel and looked at her. Not smiling. Not scowling. You're right, I said. I'm not. We stood there in silence. She waited for more. Some confession, some admission, but I gave her nothing. Let her fill in the blanks. Because the power was never in what I could do to her. It was in making her wonder what else I was capable of. That night, I told Jason she had stayed a little later. He asked what she wanted. I just shrugged. Nothing important. And I meant it. She had taken so much of my energy over the years. My confidence. My peace. My sense of safety around the people I was supposed to call family. Now she couldn't take a single thing. She had finally seen the edge of the person she'd underestimated for years. And it shook her. Not because I attacked, but because I didn't have to. The weeks that followed settled into something I never thought I'd experience around Madison. Peace. Not the performative kind where everyone smiles and grits their teeth through the tension, but a real, palpable quiet. She stopped calling as much. She no longer dropped uninvited into planning conversations or tried to dictate how family events should be organized. When she spoke to me, it was polite, even careful. It wasn't that she had become warm. She hadn't. But she had become aware. Aware that I wasn't the easy target she once relied on to fuel her sense of superiority. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving around her. I was simply living. I focused more on work and on myself. I started painting again. Something I'd given up when I married Jason and life got busier. I joined a local group of women who hosted small pop-up art shows around the city. Nothing flashy. Just something for me. Jason noticed the change too. You're lighter lately, he said one night as we walked home from a friend's party. I feel like myself again, I said. He took my hand and gave it a squeeze. I'm sorry it took me so long to really see what was happening with her. I didn't say, it's okay. Because it hadn't been okay. Not for a long time. Instead I said, you're seeing it now. That's what matters. And he was. At the next family dinner, Madison made a snide comment. An old reflex, clearly unplanned. Something about the art show I'd just done. You should invite us next time, she said. I've always loved local hobby work. Jason looked up from his plate and said, Emma's not a hobbyist. She's built something. You should ask her about it. The table went quiet. Madison blinked. She didn't reply. She wasn't used to being corrected, especially not by her brother. And definitely not in defense of me. Later that night, Jason asked if he'd gone too far. I told him no. Not even close. For once, someone had drawn a line she couldn't cross. That dinner marked a new rhythm. The family dynamic began to shift. People started turning to me with questions, with ideas, with acknowledgement. Not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. And without Madison constantly reshaping the narrative, they saw me clearly for the first time. I wasn't the outsider anymore. I wasn't the girl Jason married. I was Emma. Capable. Unshakable. And Madison? She was still there, still hovering around the edges of every room, still trying to find a new role to play. But now she played it with hesitation. Because she finally understood something she never had before. I had never been beneath her. I had just been quiet. And now that I wasn't, she didn't know what to do with me. Madison never apologized. I never expected her to. People like her don't ask for forgiveness because they rarely believe they've done anything wrong. But even without the words, I could feel the shift every time we were in the same room. The balance of power had changed. The script she had written for me, the one where I was the weak, awkward outsider she could mock without consequence, had collapsed. And without it, she didn't know how to act. The last family gathering of the year was Christmas at Elaine's house. The air smelled like cinnamon and pine, and the whole place was glowing with soft lights and carefully arranged decorations. I arrived with Jason and a tray of homemade pastries. People smiled when they saw us. Several family members came over to ask about my latest art event. They weren't just being polite. They were genuinely curious. Madison arrived late. She wore something understated, simple black slacks, a cream sweater, flats. It was the most toned-down outfit I'd ever seen her wear to a holiday. She offered quiet hellos. No grand entrance. No performative hugs. No commentary on the food or my dress or the gifts people exchanged. It was almost unsettling. At one point, I caught her standing alone in the hallway, staring at a photo on the wall. It was from years ago, long before I was in the family. She looked younger. Glossier. In control. Now she looked smaller. She noticed me watching her. We locked eyes for a second. She didn't smile. I didn't either. Later, while people were drinking coffee and picking at leftover cookies, she sat across from me at the dining table. For a long time she said nothing. Then quietly she asked, "Are you happy?" I looked at her carefully. Her tone wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't cold. It was curious. "I am," I said. "Really happy." She nodded slowly. "That's good." She stood up and walked away. No more. No less. It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't a breakthrough. But it was a moment. And for someone like Madison, that was monumental. Because what she had never understood all those years she spent trying to humiliate me, was that I never needed to win her over. I never needed her approval. And I definitely never needed her to see me as her equal. All I needed was to stop shrinking so she could feel tall. I had done that. Now I took up space. Not in a loud, theatrical way, but in the way that people notice without understanding why. The way that commands respect without needing to raise your voice. That's how you win against people like Madison. You don't destroy them. You simply become undeniable. And let them live in the quiet of everything they failed to break.